Hey there, welcome to Visual Communications, Multimedia 110. I'm Curtis Stage. We're back for lecture number 6, and today we're going to be talking about typography. So we've talked a little bit about the principles and elements of art design, film photography. Now we're going to transfer into text and finding out about what fonts can do and why they're important for our projects and for communicating visually. So typography is the art and technique of arranging type and written words. Right? It's a visual form of language. So it is, again, we've talked about this already. Each font is a symbol. So words are symbols if we were thinking about our past lectures. But they're also visual. And we communicate both ways. So fonts can be very powerful, and typography can be very, very powerful because not only does it communicate through the language that you're reading, but visually it also communicates as well. And that's what we're going to kind of focus on a little bit today. So it's a visual form of language, graphically representing text. And so our reading number 6, which you're going to do, covers a short history of the alphabet, which I think is also interesting too. So, the knowledge and application of good typography practices and choosing the right typeface, how we make it work in our designs, that's important to visual communications. We want to make sure that the type that we're picking when we're making decisions, whether it's a logo or whether it's a graphic layout or whether it's motion graphics in film or TV, whether it's lower thirds, titles for in an interview situation, let's say on CNN, let's say it's graphics that are on ESPN. All these things include typography, and the decisions that we make are very important. I'm not going to have any film examples today. I'm not going to have any TV examples, but I'm going to have you look for those in your project, in your assignment for this week. So we're going to be kind of shifting gears a little bit and looking at TV for what kind of fonts they're using. So the idea that we want to think about is that when you're picking the right typography, you're communicating something that can be communicated only through that typography. If you used a different typeface, if you used a different style of font, then you might be communicating something completely different. So it's really important for us to look at the way that we communicate through typography. So why is it so important? Right? Well-styled, properly set type can be all the difference in the tone and layout that we're working on. It can really impact the way we read the graphic design, or if something's on TV, if something's in film, we need to be able to legibly make it out. If we're in a restaurant and we're looking at a menu, there's nothing worse than sitting in a restaurant and looking at a menu and you cannot read it. If it's dark in the restaurant, this happens to me all the time. Look, I'm getting older. Dimmer lights, not so hot for me. I got to put on my glasses to read everything now, right? This kind of thing, right? You young people don't have to worry about this yet, but just wait, you will. And if you're in a restaurant and the menu is, the fonts are not right and then they're small, and then it's dark, you get that combination going. It's frustrating for the people that are viewing that restaurant menu. So real world applications, it's super important. We don't think about it all the time. A lot of times designers don't think about all the different people that are going to be reading that font, that typeface that they've selected. So we're going to talk about that today. So again, these can make the difference between awful and great design. The typefaces themselves may be chosen in a way that works well with the rest of the layout and the color scheme, and if there's a grid. You have to think about all of these things when you're choosing your fonts. What's the rest of the layout look like? What are the other elements that are happening? What are the other principles and elements of design and art that are happening? The font is going to interact with those things too. So the typeface that you pick, the style that you pick, that's going to interface with other principles and elements of design, and that's going to be important. Failing at following typography's best practices can affect our designs negatively. There's nothing worse than interacting with bad typography if you're a designer. Now, the general public may not really care so much. Maybe you haven't cared in the past. You'll walk by things all the time, and the typography is chaotic and crazy. There's lots of mixes of things, and you don't even notice it necessarily. But it can make the difference between someone stopping in your shop and going to the shop next door. I literally will not go into places of business if the design is bad. Probably some of you have heard this from me in class, face-to-face classes, but I feel really uncomfortable in a store that is poorly laid out. The furniture doesn't look so good, the lighting's bad, but if the design's bad, I am definitely out. So I always appreciate great design when I go to a public place or a store. Case in point, LAFC, the Los Angeles Football Club, just opened up their new stadium, Banc of California, downtown Los Angeles. Maybe some of you have been to it. It's really amazing structure. And their typography and the color schemes and their layout, everything they picked for this place was amazing. It all fit together really well. When you're there, you feel like, okay, this represents this team and it represents the city. And if the typography stood out as different from the architecture or the furniture or the color schemes, it would be glaring and it would make you feel like, why do they pick that? But it doesn't. When you go there, and if you have a chance to go there, the typography all fits. You go to Dodger Stadium and it's similar, although there's a lot more going on at Dodger Stadium. LAFC Stadium, everything matches. Even the outside vendors, they've converted their typography, or they've converted the color schemes for their typography to the black and gold and white. Dodger Stadium doesn't do that so much, but you can, when you go to Dodger Stadium, you'll see that it's got kind of a retro style 50s font, kind of a modern, mid-century modern. We're going to talk about modern fonts in a second. It's got kind of a modern style font because Dodger Stadium was opened in 1957. And so when you go there, you get this kind of, we're going to think of it as old-timey. Of course, it was super modern when it was built, but we're going to think of it as old-timey fonts. The Dodgers logo, that font face, was actually designed in the early 1900s. So that really does have an old-time font feel. And it's similar to Coca-Cola, right? That script font. We're going to talk about those in a second. But all the other fonts in Dodger Stadium are not that old script font. They are a modern font from the 50s. So look closely next time you go to Dodger Stadium at the different kinds of fonts. And that's going to be part of your assignment number 6 as well, is to be looking at different fonts and what they represent. So when we are looking at something like this pizza place, look at the different fonts that they have in one. This is just on a store window, right? You're walking by a store window, and here you go. I'm counting 1, 2, 3, 4 at least different kinds of fonts here. Some of you are like, they're just trying to, it's fun and kind of, it's fun and it's crazy and, pizza place. But it is visually confusing, and it is disruptive to the design overall, confusing to the customer on what this place is possibly. Now, this isn't super terrible, because it is a pizza place, but, just not a great habit to pick 4 different fonts for your layout design. So, things you can ask yourself, is your font saying beach vacation when it should be saying job interview? Right? Do the elements of your font clash? Do they complement each other? Do they effectively communicate the qualities you want to project? If you're a company and you want to project this fun playfulness, does your font project that? Or does it project seriousness? And so what are the qualities of your company? And your font should be saying that, or in most cases it should be saying that. It doesn't have to be all the time. These considerations are part of what makes choosing fonts important, part of the design process. It may be the most important part right at the start, is what fonts you're choosing. Color and font are probably going to be the first thing people notice. So font choices, they usually set the tone for the whole design, right? And they really can influence the viewer's feelings about the product or the company or whatever. Take this Coca-Cola on the side that was redesigned as in papyrus, right, which is a famous font that most people hate. You look at this one, and if you're a Coca-Cola fan, you were up in arms that Coke decided to reinvent their font in papyrus. People would be extremely upset, right, because they're used to Coca-Cola being that old, cursive, handwritten, script style font, and to change it to this style would be not very exciting for fans of Coca-Cola, but also it sends a mixed signal of what Coca-Cola is about. That old style Coca-Cola font has a much different feel than this papyrus font doing the same thing, right? So those are things that we want to think about. Bad typographic choices always distract your design's message and intentions, always. And this is something that we want to be very clear about as designers. And those of you who are not designers, when you're looking at visual communication, we want really you to understand why bad typography doesn't work. Okay, so now let's look at concepts of typography. And there's three that we need to be concerned with: font, typeface, and glyph. And the first two, most people get those confused. They interchange those, and that's okay, but they are different. And we need to probably look at these visually to understand what's going on here. And we'll get to the glyph in a second, but font and typeface, I like to think of them as two parts that kind of work together in typography. And remember, typography, of course, is the umbrella idea of fonts and typeface. Typography is the design or art of using typeface and fonts, right? So typography also gets confused, of course. People will just say, oh, what typography are you using? That's not it. Typography is the design of the layouts that you're doing with typography. So if we look at a typeface, we're talking about, let's say, here's three: Futura, Comic Sans, New Times, or Times New Roman. Those are all three are typefaces. And there's hundreds and hundreds of typefaces out there. So if we look at the difference between typeface and font, we've got this. So typeface is Futura, and then the fonts are all the different styles and weights that will happen within a typeface. So if you take Futura and you look at its, and then you break it down to the font, the font of Futura has all of these different styles and weights. So that's the difference. Fonts are the styles and weights within a font family. So font family or typeface is Futura, and then you break it down and you get to the individual things. So a glyph is a little bit different. It's a specific shape of a letter in a typeface. It's like saying we're going to design a typeface and I'm going to design the letter A. It better have these characteristics so that everyone knows it's an A. Does that make sense? Glyphs started out as symbols, right? Think of like Egyptian hieroglyphs. So the agreed upon symbol is the important part about glyphs. So within a font, these are the elements. You've got cap line, mean line, baseline, ascender, X height, serif, and descender. If you take a typography class, if you're a graphic design student and you move on, you're going to take a typography class and you will learn how to use these elements of fonts to create fonts yourself. So you will know what a cap line is because you'll have to make something that has a cap line. So the cap line, of course, if you look at my graphic to the left, is the very top line of the font. If you think about the baseline as the bottom that the characters take up, right, that the font face takes up. The cap line's the top, the baseline is the bottom, and the mean line is the middle line, usually separated where you'll see, kind of where the characters kind of separate and change. So if you look at the B closely, you can see that the B changes at the mean line. The A doesn't quite change at that. For the capital A, it doesn't quite change. In this font, it doesn't quite change at the mean line, but the B does. The C doesn't have a change at the mean line, so you can see that the mean line is somewhat right in the middle. Then right below that, you've got the ascender and descender. We've got that as part of, so descender, of course, if you look at the lowercase g down at the bottom there, that's a descender, right? That's where the lowercase g is. And the ascender would be something above the cap line, or excuse me, above the mean line. So the ascender, like the b, the lowercase b, is above the mean line and going up to the cap line. So that's an ascender. So the descender below the baseline and the ascender is above the mean line. Okay. Then you've got x height, the height of the main body of the lowercase letter. So that's the x height. The serif, of course, is the feet. If you look at the F there, right? Let's look at the F. The bottom of that F has a little foot on it. That's a serif. When you hear the word sans serif, which we're going to talk about in a minute, that wouldn't have that little foot there. So that's a serif there. You can see on the lowercase f a little bit more detail that that is a terminal right there, that the lowercase f where it's circled with the terminal. And the top of the lowercase d, that's also a serif. So some people think of serifs as kind of fancy fonts, and that kind of helps you as well. All right, so now we've got categories of typefaces. And there's four main ones. We have to be very familiar with these. There's serif, like I just kind of told you. The serifs have those feet on them, and on the ascenders, they'll have the little hooks there on the ascender part of the letter. They'll have a hook. Right. So the serif is usually thought of as old style or transitional font. Some modern fonts can be serif, and some slab fonts can be serif as well. And I'll give you some examples of that. And then sans serif does not have the same little fancy feet or on the descenders and the little top part on the ascender. So sans serif is just a straight font, right? So something like Helvetica would be a sans serif. Sans, S-A-N-S, is a French for without, so without serif. Script font is more formal, okay, and it's usually casual font. Usually it could be like calligraphy or kind of a handwritten font. Script font it's connected, right? So cursive handwriting is a script font. But you can go in other directions on this too. So we'll look at those. And then a decorative font or display font. So we'll look at all these. Graffiti is a decorative font. Psychedelic fonts, decorative type fonts. Okay. So when you're choosing these fonts, this is where we want to make our decisions as designers. Which fonts do we choose? Old style, transitional fonts. These are best used for print body. The one on the top, right, I put that in there because people say, oh, that's an old-timey, old-style font. Yes, it could be, but that Blackbird is actually a decorative font. So it feels old style, but if I'm talking about that typeface, I'm talking about that as a decorative style. I'm not talking about as an old style font. So people get confused. They'll say old-timey, that Blackbird looks old-timey. It's not necessarily wrong because you are right about that, but down below it is what we're talking about really when we're talking about old style. Kind of think of old style as classic fonts. They're very legible actually, and you can use them in print body. So books are often, they'll use New Times Roman when you are reading a book that is fairly easy to read. Here's another example. Century, old style, italic. And gives you an example there. Okay, so modern typefaces. They started off probably in the late 1800s, but we saw them kind of gain really a lot of popularity in the 1920s, 1930s, going up to contemporary times. And we still use them today, of course. And they work well for headlines, decorative details. Not great for reading lots of copy. So they can be bold. Big areas on design, big headlines. This is where modern typefaces work really well. And again, modern sounds like it would be from today, but we're actually talking about, I would say, from the 1920s to the 1960s or 70s is we're talking about modern typeface. Okay, people will say contemporary typeface if they're talking about current typefaces that were designed now. So more examples of modern typefaces. Modern typefaces can have serifed bottoms on them, but you'll see the difference sometimes in the one up on top, that tall and skinny nature of that font. And look at that E on that word there, how where it's thicker in some places and thinner in others. That is something you see a lot in modern. Look at the O, right? That O, you'll see that a lot in modern typefaces where it's thicker on one side, thinner top and bottom. Really cool. The G is great, right? And again, that's how I can always find modern typefaces, is when I see a kind of a variance in thickness within the font, right? Within the individual letters, I can see the variance in thicknesses. So you see that really well here in the E's and the O's, and you know, the A has it a little bit too. So that's how you can kind of know there. Sans serif, we talked about that just a second ago. So the one on the top here is a sans serif. And it's showing you it does not have those fancy feet and tops in the ascender and the descenders. So it's a contemporary style. Sans serif was more contemporary, more modern than modern. This is sans serif fonts were developed, I would say, in 60s, 50s, but really get into the 60s is where we see sans serif. When we get to the mid-century modernism, which I know it's confusing because the word modern, you're thinking, okay, that's today, but think of it as contemporary, right now. But they really started in the 60s and get into the 70s and took off huge in recent years. I'm going to say the last 15 years, sans serif fonts were started to use for everything. So best used in print headlines, short bits of text like sidebars. They're not really for lots and lots of text to read. Usually you want to use Times New Roman, something like that, which is a serif font, the one below. But for big, bold headlines, really great. On screen, they are readable, very readable. So when you're on a computer, fonts like Helvetica, Verdana, Arial, great. When you're in print, like magazines or things like that, sans serifs are a little tougher to read, possibly. Bigger, bolder versions, great for headings, subheadings. Here's some examples. And you'll see a lot of logos, a lot of companies in the last few years, maybe 20, 30 years, moved to this type of font face. They moved to very straightforward sans serif. A lot of people think they're kind of boring. It depends, but there's so many variations on them now that I feel like there's so much you can do with them. They're safe in some ways, right? They don't have necessarily, sometimes they get knocked for not having a ton of style, but you'd be surprised. You can get a lot of style for them. So little or no difference in the thickness. Remember, that's what we talked about a little bit, with the other, with our modern typeface, is that there's a variance in thickness. And with these, we don't see any variance in thickness. They're all the same throughout the font. Okay, so when we talk about slab serif, this one's kind of a fun one because it's kind of a combo. It's in between modern and sans serif contemporary fonts. You've got this kind of combination going on because you do still see the serifs many times with slab serif, and you'll also see that there's very little variance in the thickness and thinness of letters like you'll see in the modern font faces. You'll see that thin, thick happening, but with slab serif, you don't see the thin, thick. You start seeing that they're very even throughout. You'll see that in the graphic to the right. Also, you'll see with slab serif that they're vertically, you'll see that they vertically move up and down. They're taller and skinnier than they are wider sometimes, but they're bold. So we'll see a boldness mixed with a taller, skinnier vertical stressing. And that's really important, right? This is how you can tell. Sometimes it's tough for people to tell slab serifs out, but I can tell because they don't have that thin thickness variation happening, and the letters are thick, but they're also tall. So it's this kind of nice combo. I really like slab serif typefaces. And here's some examples. The Firebox one on the left, it has serifs on that. The bottom of those are the F, the bottom and top of the letters. Those are serifs. They're just really thick. Now that one's kind of an interesting one because it does have thick, thin, but it's more of a style. The one on the right, you can see it on the right, is kind of a zoomed in usage of slab serif. That one shows you that you can see kind of the lettering there where it is the same variance in thickness throughout. Script typeface, very formal, calligraphy style, handwritten style, usually difficult to read, so you do not want to have these things happening throughout the whole. Let's say you're building a website and you have a paragraph for someone to read. You do not want to use script font throughout that paragraph. You want to keep this to headlines. You want to keep it to very small applications. You're not using it very much for either print or screen, right? You'll see these a lot in logos, watermarks. You'll see that. They're very decorative. You don't want to combine too many different kinds of script typefaces as well, because if you're doing that, you're really confusing your viewer. Some of the most famous logos of all time are using script style typefaces. And so you've seen them all over the place. And here's some examples, right? Coca-Cola's been around since the 1800s. And again, it feels old-timey because it's cursive writing, but Ford and Coca-Cola have been around a long time, but Instagram and Pinterest still use that script style, and they're new. So they have this kind of combo. And then the question is, why did they use those? Why did Instagram decide to use this style of typeface? And that's something that I want us to think about for our discussions. We're going to be talking about that in discussion number 6. Why do you think a certain company used a certain type of typeface, right? So that'll be what we discuss. What typeface you pick. If you're picking script typeface, it can be handwritten cursive. So it can look modern like this one does. It doesn't have to look old-timey like some of these do, right? It can look modern like this does. So I like this Fly to Hawaii too because it fits the style of what this could be an ad, right? And it fits the style of that. It has a motion or a movement to that handwritten text there, the handwritten fonts. It gives us this feel of movement, whereas the other typefaces might not, right? Sans serif font or even a serif font might not give us this feel of movement like this could. So a script style of typeface, you're choosing that because you're wanting to get something across to your viewer. And in this case, I think this really works. Decorative. So decorative has variable characteristics, and you see Midnight Rider, which is handwritten, but it creates a different feel for our viewer. You'll see some things happening to where it looks like maybe it was spray painted, or it was written, it was cut out in wood block or things like that. So it's very decorative. It can resemble vintage type or grunge. You can use them in screen and print, but you again want to limit these to headlines, decorative details, ornaments, that kind of thing. It's not good, obviously, to use decorative fonts for reading copy. Here's some more that are decorative fonts. And again, it's a matter of what you're choosing as an artist, designer, right? What you're choosing as a motion graphics artist for film and TV, how it's going to all play out within the whole bigger picture of your design. So I like this picnic in caps. This is, giving an example of, let's say there was a graphic layout with this text. It's a very decorative font, and it's giving us this fun example of how you would pair it with a graphic. And then the amber, this maybe be some sort of scotch or some sort of liquor design here. And it's going with this old-timey font face. But notice it's got a lot of things going on in that font face. Right? It's got these flag elements that are above and below the amber and the taste. And those are matching the font face element. And it's kind of a combo. It almost feels like it's a script style font, just the way that it's shaped. So decorative fonts can then also be shaped. And that's the one big difference between them. Look at the Hello Summer. Those fonts are all pushed together and shaped to create this kind of fun thing. So here's where the fonts start looking like graphic elements themselves. So when you get to decorative, you're now manipulating the font as a designer, as a graphic designer, to create visual elements with the font face itself. So Hello Summer is a great example. In fact, all these are great examples where you're using it in such a way where it's creating the idea that that's a graphic element too and fits just as much with the other elements on the screen. Each one of those things could be, if I'm talking about that Hello Summer, each one of the typeface fonts there could just as easily be one of the graphic elements too. And there's where you see decorative font quite a bit. So don'ts. Let's talk about some do nots. Don't pair decorative fonts together with script fonts. They're too close together. You can have a decorative font that is script, and again, the decorative fonts they're going to be much more graphic elements. They're really a graphic part of your piece. Modern fonts and slab serif, they present similar shapes to old style fonts, so they may not have enough contrasting elements to make them stand out as distinct from your print body copy. Choose fonts with lots of fine details, so don't do this. Don't choose fonts with a lot of fine details for computer screens. Right? It's thin, so modern fonts where it's thick and thin, and I need to read a lot of that on a computer screen, our eyes are going to be really hurting. Things may be changing with new ultra high resolution screens though. So we just, we've got so many screens out there, iPad Pros where Apple really renders fonts really well. It's still tough to read though. So just be aware of that. All right, here's some examples of some bad combos of fonts. So I don't think I need to tell you on the left, just too much things going on, very difficult to read, all that stuff. And then with the graphic elements behind these typefaces that were chosen, and you can see base for a cause would maybe not be so bad if that was it. But then all the other bands that are below that, I guess those are bands, are also in the same typeface. And that makes it very difficult to read, and it also is boring visually. My eye doesn't know what to move to. Now, on the right, here's too many fonts. So the one on the left, not enough fonts. Well, let's talk about the one on the left again for a second. The Saturday, November 24th, that font is completely different style font than the base for a cause. Completely different style. We've got this kind of, graffiti style, tagging style font for base for a cause. And then we've got this, really, what kind of font is that? That's a decorative font for Saturday, November 24th. I mean, they're both decorative, but we've got two totally different decorative style fonts in the same design. Terrible. Okay, you don't want to combine decorative style fonts. And I see this all the time in graphic design. Those of you who are just communications majors, I want you to be looking out for this. You'll be really using this to your advantage when you're creating PowerPoints even, let's say, right? So some of you go, I'm not a designer, I'm never going to do this. But if you're creating Keynote or PowerPoint presentations, hey, you can use some of these tips to make better presentations. So the one on the right, I mean, just way too much going on in terms of font faces. I mean, how many do we have there? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, all in one flyer. That's not going to work. Very confusing. Yes, your eye's moving around, so you've got a lot of eye movement as a viewer, but we're confused. I don't know what's what. I know what this designer was trying to do was try to make things kind of fun and to really separate things out so everything was, kind of your eye moved to those different objects, but this is not the way to do it. Using different fonts confuses your viewers. Here's some more examples. You'll say, well, hey, the one on the left is laid out pretty cool, but again, way too much going on in terms of font styles. I don't mind the graphic elements, and I don't mind that the font is starting to become graphic, right? Very decorative. But again, using too many decorative fonts in one layout is really going to be difficult. The Fork and Spoon, there's a logo using decorative fonts, just not in a good way, and then mixing those decorative fonts with a sans serif contemporary font is really not a great idea. So So, you know, the fork and the spoon are the contemporary sans serif, and then you've got the ampersand, that this highly decorative, you know, old-timey stylistic thing, and it just doesn't really work. They don't make any sense. Where does that ampersand come from in the Asian eatery? I'm getting a mixed signal here is what I'm saying, right? I'm getting this modern or contemporary, I would say, and then I'm getting this kind of restaurant that could be from the 1800s. What's going on here? The Northern Pacific poster for, you know, this looks like some sort of poster for you know, some, okay, so the Northern Pacific poster, again, you know, great idea here. They are using a lot of decorative typefaces, but I think it's too many decorative typefaces, right? It's too confusing. And then they're also using decorative typefaces in the small fonts that we have to use. And I see this a lot on posters. You'll see it on posters for big festivals, big music festivals, and they'll use decorative typeface all over it. It's almost impossible to read. And then the last one over here, this Avatar, right? That's the Avatar logo for the movie, and using papyrus, which again, just like we talked about earlier with the Coca-Cola, it's a font that's been overused and everybody knows that's papyrus. So sometimes you'll choose a font that's just terrible, doesn't make any sense, and nobody really knows why Cameron chose papyrus as the font face here for the logo. I guess maybe trying to show off, I mean, this is a sci-fi movie, and I guess trying to bridge the gap between sci-fi and maybe early language or something. I have no idea. And I think nobody else does too. It was a big mistake by James Cameron to use papyrus. Some of you are probably, hey, I don't mind that logo. But you know what? As soon as everybody saw it, every designer in the world was like, why is he using papyrus? So immediately, if I'm making a movie that's going to be as huge as Avatar, I don't want to have some sort of recognizable, cheesy font face that I'm using. They didn't even alter the font face very much, except for the A's. It's the only thing they altered. Everything else is the exact way that papyrus is designed. Okay, so that's been our lecture number 6 on typography. We will see you in our readings, and where we'll pick up on alphabets, and also in our assignment, where we're going to pick this up and start looking at what different typographies and typefaces are used out in the world around us. See you next time.